to advancing rights and opportunities for women and girls. It includes more than 100 women's research, policy, and advocacy centers, many on academic campuses, a corporate circle of 30-plus Fortune 500 companies, and a president circle of academic leaders. We work closely with these networks and various advisory committees to generate research to move a national agenda and policies to improve the lives of women and girls. We focus on the continuing absence of women from key decision-making tables and the deepening poverty of women, addressing the barriers that they confront, but also potential solutions. We are very solutions-oriented. So today's webinar is very important to us. We well understand that the barriers and impediments that women confront in moving into leadership positions and being able to advance are nuanced and complex. They need to be understood in order to address and diminish them. So today, we're bringing together leading thinkers in our network whose experiences bridge academia, government, and the corporate sector. Our view is that research, collaboration, and advocacy are all needed to drive change. Just a few examples of our leadership initiatives include advancing multicultural women across sectors. We've just finished an 8-company study on deepening the understanding of barriers women of color confront in corporate and other arenas, but also the business case for advancing women of color, given the increasing globalization and changing demography of this country. Another program looks at building economic security among low-income women and their families through quality jobs, education and skills-building training, and child care. And we participate in a 30% coalition focused on bringing 30% women onto corporate boards and into executive leadership positions by 2050. And in all these various strategies, we work together across sectors utilizing a collective impact strategy, which involves working across silos with multiple stakeholders from our network, but also beyond, to develop shared agendas and benchmarks that we can all work toward. And now it's my pleasure to turn the afternoon program over to Shama Venkateshwar, our Director of Research and Programs.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Before we turn to the speakers, I just want to get a sense of who you all are, what industry you work in. So you see a poll in front of you. If you would just take a quick second to actually answer that poll, that would be wonderful. I'm giving you about 10 seconds to do this. As soon as you're done, we will publish the poll, and we will move to the speakers. Just a few more seconds. Okay. So it's interesting. Most of you are from corporate, as you can see. We've got a few people from the nonprofit world as well as from higher ed. So thank you very much for that. I want to now turn to Anne-Marie Slaughter. We're really proud to have her on this call today. As you all know, Anne-Marie has been very, very much in the news in the last few weeks with her article in The Atlantic, and we are terribly, terribly proud to have her. So I just want to turn to her to tell us a little bit about some of the responses that she got after she received this, after she published the article. So Anne-Marie, let me turn to you.
I am to be able to do this. I am new to webinars, but opportunity to be able to talk to a lot of people without leaving my desk or my house, and so I'm really looking forward to the conversation because I've been doing a lot of speaking and I find I learn a great deal from the questions. I thought I would start by just going through in broad categories the kinds of responses I've gotten. I mean, I've gotten hundreds directly through email or emails to The Atlantic, and then of course there are thousands and thousands on the web if you follow the chat and commentary on all the blog posts. But I'm going to focus on the ones that have been sent directly to me, and they fall into three broad categories. The first is really gratitude, and probably there's some selection bias here in that the people who write me directly I think are more likely to be the people who are positive than the ones who are negative, but both through email and frankly everywhere I go, and I'm still spending half my time, 60% of my time talking about foreign policy, I meet women of every age, but particularly women 30 and under, who are just enormously grateful for what they see as breaking a kind of code of silence, of putting this on the table in a way that allows lots of people to talk about it. That's the first thing, and I knew that it was on the minds of many young women. That's why I ultimately decided to write the article. What I was less aware of is how many women feel deeply grateful for what they see as a conversation that has shifted the blame or the fault away from them individually. And I get countless emails that start, "I cried when I read your article." And then they go on to tell me their story, and the story is invariably one of graduating from school with high hopes and high ambitions, getting married, having children, and then something happens. Life happens. A child is sick, or you lose a job, or you just can't manage with the job opportunities you have and the kids, and so then a sense that they have failed, that they've had to take a different job, stop out of the workforce completely for a while, work in a much less high-powered position than they imagined, and that they felt that was their fault. And they see this article and the conversation it launched as lifting that burden off their shoulders. And to me, that was a real surprise. Although I talk about it in the article that I said that Sheryl Sandberg's piece had a note of reproach, and I didn't think that was a good way to go. I had no idea how many women felt that somehow they were being held to a standard they couldn't meet, and it was their fault. So that's the first category, and a category, as I said, that is the largest category, both of what people say and people write. The second category is less fun to read, either in print or in emails, and I've gotten some doozies. Again, I don't get a whole lot of this face-to-face, although when I meet people sometimes I can see that they feel very critical. And there's three subcategories of criticism. I mean, the first is really that this is undercutting the feminist movement, that by saying anything other than, of course women can do it, and of course, if you're just organized enough or dedicated enough or committed enough or something enough, you can do this. To say anything else is to open the door to, essentialism, to men are one way and women are another, or to stereotypes that women want to be home with their kids and men don't, or simply to give people, read men, an excuse not to hire women. And I anticipated that criticism. Again, the article opens by saying, I have always thought that too. I have always been somebody who says, of course you can have it all. And I've always felt, like I'm a proud feminist standard bearer. So I did anticipate this criticism, and my answer is just that we're in a very different place than we were 10 or 20 years ago. I mean, I tell the story that when we were watching the Democratic convention and John Kerry was speaking, my 14-year-old son asked me who he was, and I said he'd run for president and he was a senator, and that if President Obama was elected, that John Kerry might well be Secretary of State. And my son, who is 14 and pretty hip, said, just blurted out, he said, "You mean a man can be Secretary of State?" And he genuinely, it had not dawned on him. So I think we're in a very different position. I think we can afford to have this conversation and advance the cause of women and men who are feminists in the sense they believe in truly equal rights. There's a second category of criticism that is really about discouraging the younger generation, that this is a very depressing message. And I have had a number of younger women say to me that they were sobered and somewhat distressed, but most of them say, but it was really good that you put it out there because I know I need to think about these things and I ought to be thinking about them now. But there is a view that says, look, the last thing in the world women need to hear, younger women who are having a hard time getting jobs, that they are going to have to start thinking now about how they're going to have kids at a time when they need to be investing in their careers in their early 30s, and what are they going to do after that. And then there's a subcategory that, again, I anticipated, but the title of the article made much worse, which is that this is a very elitist conversation, that this is a conversation for women who have the choice about where and how to work and to stay home, where the vast majority of women don't have a choice. They have to work. So these are, privileged people's problems, which again is something I did understand and something I really look forward to Susan Lambert's discussion, and in writing a book I want to address ways in which women up and down the income scale can fight for policies that help everyone. I definitely think the desire to provide what your children need in terms of being there for their homework, being there when they're after school, simply being there and providing in ways that are other than purely material are the concerns of all women and, again, of many men. Which brings me to the last category of responses, which are responses from men. And here I'd say about 20% of the responses I've gotten have been from men, which is certainly higher than I expected. I was at Harvard Business School last week or 2 weeks ago, and there were 350 people in the room to hear me speak, and I'd say, again, 20 to 25% were men, which I find very encouraging. The subcategories there are responses, a lot of responses from fathers who I don't think really gave this issue much thought when they were raising their children, and many of the fathers I've heard from are fathers where their wives did most of the caregiving. But now, of course, they've raised daughters and they've shared their daughters' career ambitions, and they've seen their daughters graduate, and then they've seen their daughters have kids, and they are watching their daughters wrestle with these issues, and they think it's not right. They have a kind of, suddenly they see this issue through a different lens, and I think that's a constituency that is important and can be mobilized. And then, most interestingly, and again I predicted it, but I've gotten so many emails from guys who say, we don't have it all either. If by having it all you mean the ability to have a career and family and to be the kind of parent and professional we want to be. And that many of them point out that it's hard for a woman to take family leave or flex time or any accommodation for caregiving, but it's in some ways even harder for a man in that they are essentially then seen as not really one of the guys and not really, a man's man. The guy who says, no, I can't go out and have a beer because I got to go pick up my kids. The guy who says, let's not have a meeting then because I have to, be home for my kids. The guy who wants to be a real equal partner with his wife and both share the child-rearing responsibilities is not a guy who's necessarily on the fast track either. So I'm now more convinced than ever that this is an issue that must be addressed by men and women together in terms of parenting, providing, breadwinning, caregiving, rather than as mothers versus fathers. And I think that's a good place for us to start.
Thank you. Anne-Marie, before we move to some of the recommendations, I just want to run a couple of polls with this group, and I wonder if you would all take a quick second to answer this about whether you currently have flexible work arrangements. So let me just wait for about 10 seconds to give you a chance to reply. Okay, so most of you have responded yes, which is, again, an interesting thing. We should have next time around sort of maybe divided this on male-female, but we don't have that slide here. The next question, the very next poll that I want to ask you is that for those of you who said yes, that you have flexible arrangements, are those arrangements actually enough to get you through the day and through the work week?
Yes, here we see lots of no's.
So let me just take, again, a quick second to answer that. And again, you know, it's saying most of you don't have enough arrangements. Anne-Marie, I'm going to give it back to you now to go through some of your recommendations that came from your article.
Yep. Great. Well, first place, I'm just looking at the poll, and we'll see it in a minute, but it looks like exactly 50-50, which is very, very interesting as to whether or not those arrangements are enough. So I have broad categories of recommendations, and part of the work now is to fill in those broad categories with very specific recommendations and also examples of companies, workplaces generally, that are doing doing these things and succeeding. So the first, and I think absolutely essential, is we really do have to change the culture of FaceTime. It just cannot, we're never going to make it if the number of hours you are in the office translates to how good you are at your job. However good is measured, whether that is committed, whether that is productive, anything that is keyed to quantity of time rather than quality of work is not in the long run going to be compatible with parents having time with their children and staying on a career track in a way that will allow them to get to the top. And the best example of this is billable hours for law firms. I mean, I was a law professor for 12 years. I have billed many hours myself. And that, of course, says, you know, the more you can be in the office and the more you can bill wherever you are, you know, the more productive you are, the more valued you are. And the FaceTime in particular, workplaces really divide, but there is an entire generation that thinks if, you know, out of sight, off the job. And then when I was, you know, academics work wherever we are, so this was really a shock to me when I came into the State Department and discovered many senior civil servants who have thought that if you were not sitting at your desk, you couldn't possibly be working, whereas, as all of us know, the younger generation is accustomed to having their laptop with them wherever they are and working wherever they are. But that really does have to change, and I think we need really good examples for places that, you know, have time that you have to be in the office for meetings, and some FaceTime is absolutely essential, but then really loosens up the rest of where you work from wherever you are. The second kind of broad area, you know, I called, you know, revaluing family values. It means really actually valuing time that people spend with their family. And this is very deep, that, you know, I use the example of somebody who runs a marathon and who trains in the morning and trains at night, and so spends 6 to 7 hours on top of their workday devoted to some other pursuit. And generally when that other pursuit is something like a sport or a passion, any kind of hobby that they are passionate about, it is seen as enhancing them, whereas time spent with your children is seen, you know, at best as neutral time. You never get any credit for it, but it doesn't detract. And at worst as really a sign that you're not committed to your job, whereas in fact, the way I think about it is this is a person who lives up to their responsibilities. This is a person who has a full range of responsibilities and lives up to all of them, whether that be, the responsibility to a child to be there for an event, or to be there for homework, or simply to be there when the child needs you. But I think we can think about that as a person who lives up to their responsibilities, who is a broader person. Another way to think about this is somebody who was all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. Well, there's often wisdom in folk sayings, and the idea that people can rebalance their minds in ways that can it's often exhausting, but still I think it's a more balanced life is important. And then there's all the ways in which parenting actually, I think, you learn a great deal. Someone pointed out to me this weekend that as you rise in your career, fewer and fewer people say no to you, fewer and fewer people tell you that you're wrong. That is not a problem that children have, in my experience. They're very good at telling me both those things. But you constantly, you're challenged. You have to think very hard about yourself, about your relations with other people, about discipline, about what fights to fight. So it actually should be valued positively, not as something, as I said, that is at best neutral and at worst negative. The third category, which really is essential, is to elongate the way we think of a successful career. I point out that women in their 20s now, their expected lifespan is to 100 years old or longer. And I'm doing a good bit of research on longevity. But right now, if you go to an actuary, if you have a 20-year-old child, that's what they will tell you. Now, if you think about that, and then so let's take 25 years off at one end and 10 years off even at the other, you still have 65 years of working life. And let's just say it's 50. That's still plenty of time to have a full family and get all the way to the top of your career. You just need to think about the phases in terms of biology, because at least for the foreseeable future, children are easier to have in your 30s, starting in your early 30s and going on, then your 40s or even later. And so you need to be able to think about a period of very intense commitment to your profession pre-kids, then a period that will vary couple by couple in terms of how much time you want to be at home, but whatever, that until your kids are out of the house, you will have this enormous other additional time commitment, and you want to think about how to balance that. And then post-kids, where, as I always point out, if you'd looked at Hillary Clinton in 1996, she would have looked like Michelle Obama. She would have been an extremely successful lawyer who then became First Lady of Arkansas and First Lady of the nation, and most people would have said, well, she put her own career aside for her husband's career. Her daughter went to college in 1998, and by 2000 she was a senator and then a presidential candidate and then a Secretary of State. So we need to completely rethink that post-kids part. And again, I think if people just look at the numbers and they look at the fact that nobody wants to work in 30 years in one place anyway, there's a whole different way to rethink the way we think about careers. The fourth area, and again, these are things I talked about in the article. I said I'm from Charlottesville, Virginia, where Thomas Jefferson was born. So life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is part of my growing up. But I do think that, partly for many different reasons, technology, so much less time to simply enjoy. I'm looking outside at a spectacular fall day on the Princeton campus. A half an hour walk in the leaves is worth, countless spa weekends as far as I'm concerned, or sitting around the table enjoying good food or sport or community work, but something that makes you feel fulfilled and happy is good for your health. It's good for your productivity. It's good for your relationships. And there is nothing wrong. Indeed, it's supposed to be every American's birthright, but people feel actually guilty, it seems to me, if they acknowledge that they've worked and they love their work, but there's these other parts of their life as well. Now, the really good news about all of that is that if you read all the literature on innovation and creativity, which I do in my academic work, both as an academic myself and as someone who's been interested in these issues for a long time, all of that work emphasizes the value of incubation, where you need to let ideas simply kind of churn around in your mind without concentrating on them, without trying to come up with something, simply letting the process happen. People always say they come up with great inspiration when they brush their teeth. Well, that's precisely because they take their mind off of what they're thinking about. And it's similarly, I was just in Japan where a Nobel laureate was explaining that he got the idea that led to the Nobel Prize when he was getting into the bath. And he said very clearly, it was a talk about creativity and slower living. He said, it's the moments where you suspend that effort, that mental effort, that often your greatest ideas come. And we need, of course, as everyone knows, to be doing much more in the knowledge sphere. Innovation is everybody's watchword. And so the ability to be high-level knowledge workers, which involves coming up with ideas, means that if we don't rebalance our lives, we're going to be much less productive in that economy. Really investing in our own happiness and in our families is investing in our careers. And the last thing, and I've signaled this already, this has to be a movement that is about men and women, that is about caregivers, whether that is for children or for families or for spouses, so it's not just parents either, but that one in which men and women equally say we need to be able to invest in our children or in our parents, who of course brought us into the world, in ways that are compatible with meaningful careers that take full use of our talents and don't require us to drop off a leadership track simply because we are acknowledging loved ones in our life.
Anne-Marie, thank you so much. You've given us so much to think about, and certainly many of your statements speak to some of the questions that have come in. Folks, those of you who want to be thinking of questions, if you're thinking of questions, feel free to share them with us. There's a little box, a little chat box on the left side, bottom side of your screen. Go ahead and type those questions in, and we can certainly move them along to our speakers. So the next speaker, we are very, very proud to have Susan Lambert. Susan Lambert, as many of you know, had an article in the New York Times as well, addressing flexible work-life policies as well. Certainly many of the questions that we've heard today are addressed by Susan. So without further ado, Susan.
Okay. Well, we're going to start with a couple of quizzes. Hello, everybody. One is whether you are paid by the hour or whether you receive a salary. So if people will just take time to see how you are compensated. Well, we've got a few hourly workers out there. Wait a second, okay. Should we move to the next one? So the majority are paid by
that's an interesting one. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and then and how do you think you compare to other people? What percentage of U.S. women do you think are paid by the hour?
It's fascinating to watch this change.
Yeah, this is fun. Wow, you guys are pretty darn good there. Okay.
Susan, what's the exact number?
I am going to tell you right now, 62% of women are paid by the hour, 56% of men, and as you can see in this first slide here, that it's even much higher among workers of color, where the overwhelming majority are paid by the hour. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on the other end of the labor market, on the challenges that women face when they work in non-professional jobs, and they are paid by the hour. And my goal here is for us to just kind of expand our focus a bit today and to try to find some common ground and some common solutions. As indicated on the previous slide, the op-ed that I wrote was named When Flexibility Hurts. And I did not select that title. I think flexibility is actually a good thing. But I want to bring in the voices of women at the lower end of the labor market so we can see the kind of challenges that they face. Okay. So one of the things that Professor Slater was focusing on is that often the problem created in professional jobs is that are created by rigid work requirements and overwork. So the flexibility policies that are put forward are really intended to loosen up jobs and to reduce working time. For example, by providing workers with the opportunity to pull back without getting off track, to vary start and end times, to match family schedules, and to complete at least some work at home. But the problem is, at the other end, is that hourly jobs are already pretty loose. For many workers, the number of hours they work and the days and the shifts they work, it can really vary from week to week. And it's often common practice across industries to post schedules with little advance notice, often only a few days before the work week. And once posted, schedules are often changed at the last minute. So, work hours are not just unstable, they're also unpredictable, which makes it really hard to establish those types of family routines that, child experts tell us are important to child development, such as regular bedtime routines and monitoring homework and, having family dinners together. And of course, when you're paid by the hour, fluctuating hours means fluctuating earnings, which makes it very difficult to manage a family budget. Another reality is that often the problem, rather than overwork, is a problem that's actually growing in our labor market, which is the problem of underemployment. And this chart shows the surge since the economic downturn in the number of workers working part-time involuntarily. So these are people who work less than 35 hours a week, either because they couldn't get enough hours from their employer or they could only find a part-time job when they'd really prefer a full-time one. There are many different measures of underemployment, but a lot of these measures are telling us that, in fact, underemployment has been pretty high for some time. For example, in 2001, 36% of women in part-time hourly jobs said that they would prefer to work additional hours for additional pay. 25% of women overall in hourly jobs said that they would like to work more hours. Only 8% of women said that they would like to work fewer hours if it meant earning less. Even a greater proportion of women with children under the age of 5 said that they wanted to work more hours rather than fewer hours. 29% said they wanted more, and 7% said they wanted less. So why do we see overemployment at the top and underemployment at the bottom? Well, I'm going to give you a highly oversimplified account of this. At the top, employees are pretty big fixed costs. Salary and benefits are incurred regardless of how many hours the employee works. So the incentive to employers is to take full advantage of labor and salaried positions. It doesn't cost employers extra when an employee works 50 hours rather than 40, because often salaried workers are not normally paid for overtime. So the risk of not having enough workers to do the work is put on the workers. And you basically have to kind of man up and work those long hours. In hourly jobs, they come with few fixed costs. No salary and few, if any, benefits. For example, in 2010, only 15% of workers in part-time jobs had health insurance through their employer. So instead, costs are incurred hour per hour when an employee works. So the incentive to employers is to minimize an individual's labor. And one way employers do this is by maintaining a large pool of workers who can be slotted to work short shifts during times of peak demand. It doesn't cost employers extra to keep extra hourly workers on hand. So the risk of not having enough demand for all the workers is put on workers, some of whom are going to get very few hours or even no hours when demand drops. So what are some possible solutions? Well, let's provide employers with incentives to manage labor well, rather than always counting on employees to figure out what to do. Employers should be encouraged to manage their variations in demand, be it for services or information or data. So at the top we might require or provide incentives for employers to pay salaried workers overtime so that when there is extra work, workers get extra pay. This would be an incentive to employers to figure out how to reduce workloads, especially for highly compensated professionals, such as maybe hiring more assistants, rather than, again, expecting workers to figure this all out. At the bottom, we might require employers to guarantee a minimum number of hours to all employees so that keeping extra workers just in case you happen to need them will not be without a cost. Right now, employers do not have to pay workers for even 1 hour of work. The incentive to employers would be, instead for them to concentrate work hours on fewer workers, and we can talk about, the potential drawbacks of that if we want to. But the result is likely to be more hours for individuals and reduced rates of underemployment. And I'm going to end here by pointing out how important I think it is that we find a way to make full-time jobs work for women. These are poverty rates among working families. These are households in which at least one adult worked during 2011, and there was at least one child in the family. And the poverty rate in 2011 in households in which at least one adult worked full-time year-round was 4%, but it was 27% in families in which at least one adult worked, but no one held a full-time year-round job. And look at the rates for female-headed households. The poverty rate was 9% when the mother worked full-time year-round, but it was 47% if she worked during the year, but only part-time or year-round. Stable, full-time jobs are really the backbone of economic security for both women and families, and we really need to find ways that women at all points, I think, in the labor market can work full-time without sacrificing their own or their family's well-being. Thank you.
Thank you. Very much along the lines of what we've been trying to do with this webinar, which is to sort of give a full and balanced position on what women who are in extreme jobs, the kind of jobs that Anne-Marie Slaughter talked about, and certainly at the lower end, what happens to women when they are at the receiving end of flexibility, the sort of the other side of that. So thank you very much, Susan Lambert, for that. Before we turn to our last speaker, there are a couple more polls that I would like people to answer about overtime pay. Should salary workers receive overtime pay? So let me give you a couple seconds to answer that. Okay, thank you. So most of you say yes to that. And then the last slide, the next poll that I would like is, should hourly workers receive guaranteed work hours? Again, along the lines that what Susan Lambert argued.
This is fun.
No one's going to say no to that. So I'd like very much to introduce Anna Duarte McCarthy from Citi. Anna is a Managing Director and Chief Diversity Officer. Anna.
Thank you so much, Shauna, and thank you as well to Anne-Marie and to Susan for sharing the conversation that I am now part of. Just a couple of things. Citi is a company with nearly 270,000 employees, of which 143,000 of those are women. And I just want to share that those women are at all levels of the company. So while the conversation thus far has been both women perhaps in more extreme and more senior roles, as well as the, I think, very important conversation about women who are potentially in hourly and in part-time roles. We have women at all levels at Citi. And so the conversation about flexibility and work strategies that support our business priorities may be somewhat different for each of those women, but they're clearly compelling and important to supporting our business goals. If you move to the next slide, I wanted to share with you, and this reflects, Anne-Marie, to you, the article that you had prompted a global conversation. Citi has a network called Connect the Professional Women's Network that is powered by the LinkedIn community. It's a fast-growing LinkedIn community that's powered by Citi. And following Anne Marie's article, we had a survey that was conducted with this community, and it's nearly 70,000 professional women who are part of it, of which 520 of those women responded to the survey. And it was kind of interesting. I think, the one thing that pops out clearly is that the idea of what having it all means is actually not one notion of having it all. It's rather personal. But there were a couple of learnings that came out. And again, understanding that the women who responded are but a sample of the broader population. 36% of those respondents said that marriage wasn't a factor in that. They defined having it all. And for 27%, neither was having children. And it's interesting that career success, only 17% stated that reaching the height of success in their field was there a factor in having it all. For the majority, success was defined by a job they enjoy, where their work is valued. And for another 15%, not shown here, but for another 15%, success meant being their own boss. Now, if you move to the next slide, again, sharing some information from this survey, a strong relationship and financial security were clearly important. And while marriage might not be a part of all professional women's definitions of success, being in a loving relationship, married, unmarried, with a partner, and having enough money to do and buy what they want were the two top factors that the survey respondents defined in having it all. And then raising healthy and happy kids came in third at 73%, and having a job that I enjoy where my work is valued came in fourth. And then lastly, in terms of sharing some of the information from the survey, we looked at the generations that responded. So in looking at the next slide, we have an opportunity to look how women across generations responded. And those who were under 35 were more than twice as likely than those over 35 to equate having it all with reaching the height of success in their field. And then you can see there that on the other hand, respondents over 35 were more than twice as likely as their younger colleagues to equate it with being your own boss. So a couple of things, when we were talking about framing this conversation, we looked at this idea of flexibility, and I wanted to share with you, I'm also on the board of the Families and Work Institute, and there's been an opportunity to look at longitudinal studies in terms of looking at different criteria and attributes that people bring to the workplace. So in looking at some data from that study, and Shama, if you could, thank you. What's interesting, one of the things I've learned over the nearly 20 years of working in corporate space is that sometimes people look at the idea of flex as meaning less focused on career and less focused on advancement. And then, we talked about this earlier in the conversation, that's sometimes then attributed to women. And when we look at generations, what's interesting here is you find that young men and women are really starting to come to a very common percent in which have a desire around having jobs with greater responsibility. So that line has intersected, and you'll see that now, as in the longitudinal study, the last was conducted in 2008, finds that there's actually been a clear, there is no difference in terms of looking for jobs with greater responsibility. And I think that's really important, because that means that when talent across all levels comes into corporate America, and many of you indicated you are in the corporate sector, that ambition is strong. And so creating workplaces that can support ambition and recognize the challenges people have in managing all the priorities that come into your life over time, we need to understand that ambition is there, and that we can better support people optimizing their career and their ambition by supporting workplaces that are more effective. And just to share another data point that I felt was relevant to this conversation, another generalization that from time to time is made is that women with children are not ambitious. And if you see here, we see that again that intersection has gone up, And in fact, women, there really is very little difference between women with children and women without young children in their desire to be in jobs where there's purpose and meaning and they can make contributions. So moving forward, what I wanted to share in the couple of minutes I have is just a lens of what it's looked like from our perspective on trying to frame this conversation of flexibility in the workplace in a corporation that spans 160 countries. And so as we look at the next slide, just wanted to give you, actually we're having a question, thank you Shama. I wanted to get a sense, do you feel, those of you on the call, that your supervisor values work-life balance? So why don't we take a minute to respond to that. Okay, watching that change. So this is your immediate supervisor. Great. So as we see here, one of the reasons I felt this question was important was that very often companies like Citi will have policies in place around things like flexibility. What becomes the reality for someone is what's happening in their own unit and with their manager. And to really be able to have that supported in the workplace often encourages companies to try to do more so that managers are well equipped to have conversations about flex and support that for their employees. So if we move to the next slide, I just want to give you a quick overview of flexibility at Citi. In the past, we found, and the past is rather recent, this is going back to 2006, we did a pretty significant assessment of flexibility at Citi, and we found that we had over 35 policies, and we found that there was an inconsistent application to how people were considered. And more often than not, it was something that people, they had it, they may not talk about it, and it was almost a bit of a don't ask, don't tell. I have it, I'm not going to talk about it. There were lots of myths and misperceptions around it, and people feeling that it was something that, frankly, may not help their career, so they didn't want people to know about it. So it was an opportunity for us to really create a much more consistent way it was considered and to move it forward so that it wasn't transparent, but rather looking at, as I think Anne-Marie said earlier, it's such a business strategy to align and have a workplace that values contributions and performance and doesn't specifically have a culture where it's all about are you sitting at your desk, but rather valuing when, where, and how work gets done. So what we did was we moved toward a common platform for employees to be able to have flexible requests considered so that no matter where you were, this would be the same application process and same consideration. And a couple of key things that are important, I think. We don't look at why someone wants to have flexibility. We felt that it was important that we look at how will the work get done, and that way we can look at the areas in which the person, how they would do the work, how they would meet with customers. And I think importantly, this is also something that is eligible for any employee that can ask for flexible work. And to the conversation we were just having with Susan, it is also something that is available for hourly employees. So that was something that we felt that was important, and we should figure out how to do that. A couple of things about it. We do have a formal process. We have guidelines. We have best practices. We have training opportunities, and we also work in partnership with real estate because for businesses, this is a great opportunity to look at how you use your space. If you move to the next slide, just a couple of things about it. Not surprisingly, this program that we started at Citi was for all employees, and it's interesting to see that 42% of the participants are males. Of the females who participate, nearly 70 are in professional salaried staff, and so this speaks to what Susan was saying, that while 30% of our female participants are hourly, there's more that we can do to support them. And then, so not surprisingly, perhaps, is that remote work is still one that people look at as a real opportunity to have flexibility. And just a couple of key points. Clearly, there's an opportunity to tie a flexible workplace to driving productivity and performance. We do a lot of work to track performance and employee satisfaction, And we have found over the past several years that we launched a common policy, there's a much higher overall satisfaction with the company, higher employee loyalty, and in recommending Citi as a great place to work for employees who have flexible strategies. And we also find that performance has either stayed or improved since someone's come in. And then a couple of just key lessons there is that it's important to look at this from our perspective as a business strategy. It's, it's moved from sort of being a nice to do to important to do. We want the best and the brightest. As Anne-Marie shared earlier, millennials, among others, are coming into the workplace. They're wired. They haven't been in environments where they can't be sort of seamless of where and how they work. And I think it also speaks to the recognition that we have part-time employees, we have hourly employees, and we want to retain those employees. So we have a whole business that does a totally fully remote work for people in some of our centers as a way of retaining people in what's a competitive market area. And then I think also that there's one thing I will call out, that there is clearly trust is critical. If someone works for me in a flexible strategy, then I should trust that they are focused on their work, and it's no different if they're working out of their home in Warren, New Jersey versus working in an office at our Long Island City facility. The way that many teams work are virtual now, so there's an opportunity to recognize that flexibility can be a real business strategy. And we have work to do. There are areas at Citi where we need to continue to shift the culture around supporting flexibility, but we feel like we've made some progress and in recognizing that it's something in the go forward that is really important for us. And then lastly, if we move just to where our vision is going, is again you'll see we move from looking at this as something that was provided for some and not for others to being consistent in how we look at it, and then moving forward that it's a key business strategy. So I'll close by saying just a couple of things. One is that I think as a mother, I have a daughter turning 17 tomorrow. This is something that's been very important to me to really support workplace flexible strategies. I know that it's also critical for corporations to understand that people have multiple priorities at their life in any particular time. And I think along with our formal flexible work plan, we also want managers to understand that from time to time people need ad hoc flexibility. And that's the opportunity to go to a parent-teacher conference or be able to see the elderly parent and among other things for people to make their lives enriching and to feel valued. So I will pause there and turn it back to Shama.
Anna, thank you so much. I'm sensitive to the time. We have a few minutes left. I do want to give the speakers a chance to speak amongst themselves. And so I want to turn to Susan Lambert first, please, if you have a question for either Anne-Marie Slaughter or Anna Duarte. Susan.
Well, I guess the overall question I have about flexibility at the top, I have had the same question for a long time, is how much of it is really about the fact that we're requiring a single individual to basically do two jobs. And even if we provide they have more input in terms of when they'll do those works, it basically boils down to, you can choose to do, whatever 70 hours a week you want. And so, I wonder about, I would pose that question in terms of the extent to which the options being, offered actually change the structure of the work in ways that will allow people to effectively balance work and family.
So this is Anne-Marie. I'm noting actually, I think Courtney Inner-Simone said on the chat line that she says flexible work arrangements are very helpful, but nowhere near enough as they don't fully account for the enormous amount of work required to keep a household running, which still often falls more to women. I mean, I think this is it's a very important question. That's why I emphasized actually again in my life, what I've been able to do is it's both flexibility and the ability to actually not work periodically and to take time off or to vary the rhythms. So, there'll be a couple of weeks of very intense work and then a week or two that are really, recovery and working less. So it does seem to me that they have to go hand in hand, that no matter how much flexibility you have, you can't create more hours in the day, and when you have to devote some part of that time to family, something has to give. But I actually think flat out working all the time, even if you're doing it flexibly, is ultimately counterproductive.
Anna, do you have a
that's
question?
Right. Yeah, no, I had a thought on that, but I can move on to another question. And I think, one of the things that I think is always interesting is that, frankly, a lot of people put a high, these are all high-achieving women, or even, women at all levels who want to be successful, and not surprisingly put a lot of burden on ourselves. So one of the things that, Anne Marie, was interesting when you raised your conversation is, to what extent do we put, because there are goals that everyone is trying to achieve, whether it's personal or professional, then that often becomes like you could feel like you're failing everywhere.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the things that I was struck by was once looking at this whole concept of looking at how you are harmonizing versus trying to strike balance. And,
interesting, yeah.
Sort of looking at understanding what people really want from you in these various relationships, and what is it that family wants from one, work wants from one, and trying to find some level of harmonization. And I just want to know if you had heard any comments on that from your multitudes of respondents that you got around, what is this quest for work-life balance, and is it to some extent harmony that we really seek?
Yeah, I've gotten that a lot, and in fact, one of the things we may all need to do is throw out the term balance, because as many people point out, balance is like a scale, as if you have these two separate things. There's your work, and it's not your life. Work is part of your life. There's your work and your family, or your work and anything that is not work. But in fact, and again the millennials think this also, it's much more about integrating the parts of your life. And let's remember, it isn't just about being at work and wanting to be at home. It's also about, in my case anyway, being at home. And boy, I can't wait for Monday morning.
Right.
Where the kids go off to school or whatever, and you have a bit of quiet time and you focus on those things that you are interested in, rather than responding to others. So I think harmony is a great term. Integration, reaching a place where you are meeting your responsibilities, both personal and professional, but you are also fulfilled.
Can I make one comment? This is Susan, just to say that absolutely we all want to, kind of look at this from how we organize our own personal lives, but also, one of the things as a social scientist that we observe, right, is that when you see the same problem over and over again, generation after generation, it suggests it's really a structural problem and not an individual problem.
Yeah, that's very important.
Thank you. We've had a bunch of questions about Marissa Mayer. As you know, she's the CEO of Yahoo, who recently had a baby. But before she had the baby, she announced that she'd be taking barely any time and be going right back to work right after her child. So the questions that have come in are about, it seems as if it's a sort of a mixed message. On one hand, very happy that a woman can rise to the top as she has, but that maybe her messaging got a little garbled about the fact that, she needs to be right back on the saddle in order to be taken seriously. So, Anne-Marie, maybe I can start with you, please.
Yes, well, I felt very mixed also. I mean, mostly I was thrilled that she could make it to the top, and she's not going to have any problem overall, because I said, you can have it all if you are rich or superhuman and self-employed, and she's all three in the sense that she's the boss, and she's certainly wealthy and I think pretty superhuman. I felt that mostly I felt like, boy, this is a woman who has never had a child who says this, because my second child, I had all sorts of health complications, and whatever I might have thought going in, you know, once that baby's there, you have no idea what's going to happen. And I thought that was, you know, fortunately it looks like she had a healthy child and all is well, but part of the experience of being a parent is learning that you cannot control everything in your life, and you know, how do you cope with that? And so I thought it was both. It was naive above all, and probably the message should have been, you know, if this works and this is what you want to do, great. But for many, many women, they either can't do that or they really don't want to do that, and why should they have to? You know, I remember bonding with my first son before I had two running around as one of the most magical times of my life, where, you know, you could just be with your baby.
Yeah, this is Anna. You know, those are great points. I mean, my reaction was the same. So she's just going to be really tired. She means, and you know, and I think when we look at someone like Marissa, I mean, the great message there was that she was appointed while she was pregnant. She was named CEO, and that's what a great message that sent out. Even, you know, one could dissect that a bit, but that was a great message. And I think, you know, this is a woman who. You know, and I contrast that, Susan, to the women that you talked about. She's I think, reported to have a 7-figure salary. Her equity package will be $12 million. So she's really in a very different type of role. And so the worry for me would be, you know, that message that the next, you know, one of the things I read with concern was that people felt that the new normal would become that bosses would say, well, look, Marissa came back in 2 weeks. Why can't you? So I think that would be what we would really have to be watchful of, is that she made that choice, respect that choice, you know, and then I think that it's not the choice that we are supporting that people make as a new normal. And so I think there was just it was a clear inflection point, and you know, I think those of us, you know, further down the road of parenthood all kind of scratched our head and said, really?
Do you want to add anything to that comment?
No, I think one of the things I've learned over time is not to pass judgment on any woman in terms, or any man in terms of how they balance work and family, and that the goal should be to provide the supports, and so that people can make those choices without having to incur high costs. And she certainly won't have to incur any costs that she can't cover.
Thank you. There's a question from our board chair, Lucy Lepofsky, to Anna. Anna, how does this change in terms of wanting, you know, women who are over 29 and who have children? You know, what happens to those women who want greater responsibility?
Well, I think that part of that, you know, it's an important question, because the stats that I shared earlier were to just reflect quickly that there is conversation in both media and wherever you touch about women and ambition. In fact, there was a Harvard Business Review article a couple of years ago, Do Women Lack Ambition?
Yeah.
And I think, you know, let's stop talking about whether women are ambitious or not. Let's make it work. And I think Susan shared a great point, that the structures don't always work. And so as women, you know, you think about women in industries, and I'm talking now about salaried women, many of whom work as analysts and associates, and then they go back to graduate school, and then they may be coming out of graduate school in their late 20s, and they do think about these things. And I know at Citi, and many of our competitors do the same, really encourage conversations between women who are further along in their careers, who may have kids or, you know, have children in their lives, talk about what they have done and how it's worked for them. Because for many of the colleagues who are coming up, it's scary. You know, how is it going to work? And for the guys too now, because there's the added dual career couple. How does it work? Can I do this? And what's been really helpful is shaping and having conversations with women who have navigated their careers. And it's not to say it's always been easy, but they've done things to make it work. So I think both having transparency that you can have these conversations, making and creating a policy that supports it, such as having our flex policy, and then looking at it as a business case. It's a big investment when you recruit people from business school to come to our company, go through training, have different assignments, to lose them because we can't figure out how to make it work.
I think that leads us very nicely to our final question, and this really has come to us from various folks who have sent in the text messages. What can you advise millennials who are sort of at that cusp of, really advancing, and they are sort of navigating their workflow and also facing their own fertility at some point? What might you advise them, because there's a message that they have to sort of manage their expectations a little bit. Maybe they have to adjust their career expectations as they enter the childbearing years. So I want to start, please, with Susan.
Oh, my. Okay. I guess I will say what I kind of tell my students is that there's no good time to have a child. And so, and they're a delight, so you should have them when you think it's right for your personal life and your personal circumstances, that you can provide and care for them, and not to do what I think Anne Marie wrote about in her piece, and also that is, I think, a hallmark in some way of many of us from our generation, is that we postponed having kids until very late. And I would encourage young people not to do that.
Anna.
Yes, I think it's what I would say to people who are listening. I think that don't let ambition be defined by whether you're a parent or not, or if you have goals and you have objectives, people do continue to have strong contribution in the workplace. We have stories and colleagues of women who got promoted while they're out on maternity leave. So performance matters, and I think this shapes back to the conversation we're having. It's looking at how, when, and work gets performed that needs to shift. Cultures of FaceTime, where that's highly valued, work, they don't support men and women who want to have more flexibility, because if you're sitting at your desk all day, it's hard to do other things. So I think that needs to shift. For those of you out there, you can be strong and valued contributors, and I think your generation will do a lot to shift the paradigm of what, when, and where, how work is performed, because you're the client, you're the new workforce, and I think that you're going to help us shift the conversation.
Anne Marie Slaughter, you get to have the last word.
Well, this has been a wonderful opportunity for me to hear the other presenters and see the questions. So I would say three things. And the first, very much on Susan's point, I tell my students, I say, look, at 25, kids may be the furthest thing from your mind, but you have to recognize that it's a lot easier to have them before 35, and the infertility numbers go way up after 35, particularly at least get started. And so you need to think about it, and you need to you can't just wait till you're ready if waiting till you're ready means you're going to be over 35. So, be aware, don't go through infertility if you can possibly avoid it. Second thing, though, is I do think it's very important for women and men to define success for themselves. But what I meant by having it all was very simply what people in the 70s meant, which was, first we said women can have careers, and then we said women can have careers and they can still have families too, which was their traditional role, and that was what having it all meant. But I think what's clear to me, and I think right, is it's your life and it's what you want, and that if that means being less ambitious, that's fine, but I totally agree with Ana Duarte. If that means you want to be at the top of something, that's great, and you should absolutely go for it, but it's a highly individual decision, and people should think about it. And the third thing is you have to ask for what you need. Ana Duarte's presentation was very interesting, and I think makes the point that you are a valued person, and women often undervalue their own contributions, and that's still always something we need to work on, at least if you're in the education business. But you have to think to yourself, look, I'm really a valuable member of this team. I can continue on this team if I get X, and then have the guts to ask for it. Preferably men as well as women make a pact with the guys in your office, but you know, the employer might turn you down, but then you're no worse off, because if you need it, you need it, and if the employer says no, then you either got to make do or find another job. But I think you'd be surprised at how often, actually, particularly if there is a good relationship on a team, people will try to help you make it work for yourself, and that may well mean not progressing as quickly as you might want, or deferring certain types of work, or doing different, sort of having a sequence of your career that's a little different than you planned, but it should make it possible for you to stay in the game professionally and have a very fulfilling personal life at any level you aspire to.
Thank you so much. There were so many other questions, but unfortunately we didn't have time. But just to give you a flavor, there was questions on the role of public policy, what corporations can do to address some of these things, what is the one thing that corporations can do, the question of bringing your whole self to the workplace, and without having to compartmentalize. So many areas to discuss, and what this webinar just showed us, that there's a real hunger for discussion. I want to thank the speakers today. I certainly want to thank all the participants who sent in their questions and who listened. Before we log off, I would ask you to please take a second to answer a brief survey just on the quality of this webinar so that we can continue to bring programming to you. I want to thank the three speakers, and I want to thank the participants. Thank you very, very much from the NCRW.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please stand by.